Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz of Israel 365 News. I'm here with Pastor Trey Graham of, I'm sorry, it's the Melissa, I'm sorry, what?
First Melissa.
First Melissa in Texas. And we're doing a breakdown of the after effects of the Israeli election. It actually, I think it was one of the, we've had 5 elections in the last 4 years, and this one was the biggest voter turnout, and it really was people were very intensely interested in it. People voted, people cared. So now that we're looking at the after effects, I'd like to do a rundown of what the after effects were with my dear friend, Pastor Trey. So let's jump into it. So Pastor Trey, what just happened?
Well, you mentioned voter turnout. It was very high. It was the highest since 2015. Voter turnout was 71.3% of all eligible voters. That's, of course, all Israeli citizens, Jewish and Arab. Just for some perspective, a year ago, 67%. It was 71% before that. In 2019, you had 2 elections, 69%, 68%. So 71% was very good voter turnout, especially when people were worried about what's called voter fatigue, which is 5 elections in 43 months. None of the, so far, the previous 4 have created a stable government. I'm tired of this. I'm not going to go vote. That's called voter fatigue.
You would think that would be a very valid response to say, come on. You know, I mean, the flip side is that we do get a day off for elections. So
well, but you did go vote. Now you're right. You get to go to the beach or the mall or whatever. But yes, the day turned out to be very good for voter turnout. The question, of course, is how the math works. And we talked about this in the previous interview. There's 120 seats in the Knesset, and the number of seats is based upon the percentage of votes nationally that a party gets. Because you don't vote for a person, you vote for a party. So if you got 10% of the national vote, you'd get 10% of the seats, 12 out of 120. If you got 50% of the national vote, you'd get 60 seats. Well, it takes 61 to be a majority. And as we said on the last discussion, no single party in the history of the modern state of Israel has ever gotten 61. So you always have to form a coalition. So
it's very Jewish. It's like everything's got to be negotiated.
Well, and that's really what the big word is we need to talk about today is negotiation, because as expected, the Likud party led by Benjamin Netanyahu got the most number of seats. They got more than 1 million votes out of the 6+ million total votes. And they are going to probably end up with 32 seats. We should say that as we're recording, 93% of the votes have been counted. So it's possible there could be a shift, but Likud will end up with, we think, 32 seats, which obviously is not 61. So they're going to have to start the coalition negotiations, which is a big discussion that I'll explain in a moment.
If I can point out one thing, you're using your terminology very precisely and correctly. Unlike America, you don't vote for a candidate, you vote for the party. Right. So it is correct to say that Likud got those seats and not Benjamin Netanyahu. Americans tend to think of the personalities, and though the personalities are important, the parties are actually much more important. And people don't look at who's the second, third, fourth, fifth. When you say that Likud got 32 seats? 32, yeah. We're not just voting for Netanyahu, we're actually getting 32 candidates. I don't know if it's comparable to voting for the president and the senators and congressmen at the same time, but for example, everyone's making a big point about Ben Gvir, but there are other people in his party who are actually even more appealing to me than Ben Gvir. So it is not a personality thing, it's a party thing.
Well, it's because Israel doesn't have a separate branch of government between legislative and executive, as America does. So you're voting for members of parliament, and the leader of the parliament is known as the prime minister. And so the way the prime minister is chosen, we got to get into this coalition negotiation. So we said that Likud, we expect to have 32 seats. Well, the second biggest party will be Yesh Atid, which is led by the current Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, with 24 seats. But those two have refused to work together, so they will not be in a coalition together. So Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party negotiators have to create a coalition, not including the second biggest party. So they're going to jump to the other parties who are more naturally affiliated with them.
Which means either way you go, there's going to be a lot of people who are feeling disenfranchised. If Netanyahu gets the mandate and gets a coalition, all of the people who voted for Lapid will feel disenfranchised. And
well, every election has winners and losers, so of course.
Yeah.
So after Yesh Atid, the next biggest party is actually a matter of how you phrase it, because religious Zionism is three parties that united together to run together. So that is the Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich combination, and also Avi Moaz party. Avi Moaz, the three of those parties joined together in a unity block called Religious Zionism. That total ended up with 14 seats. So they're considered to be the third biggest bloc, but they are going to negotiate their entrance into the coalition separately. So they're going to govern as separate parties, even though they ran together in the election. So actually, the next biggest party is Shas with 11 seats.
If I can take one step back, that union was negotiated by Netanyahu a couple months before the election, and I think it just emphasizes how much of a savvy dealer Netanyahu is. He set this up so that this union they are very different people and very different parties, but they can sit together. They're not so different that they can't sit together, and them coming together really served Netanyahu's best interests.
Because he understands better than anybody this coalition negotiation process, the horse trading. Since we're here in Texas, that's what we call this, horse trading. This is what's going on. So he needed parties on the political right to pass the threshold, which we need to refer to that again. I do need to tell you that Benny Gantz, his party, got 12 seats. It's called the National Unity Party. They got 12 seats. They're going to be in the opposition. He also will not work with Likud and Netanyahu. So in the coalition, it's expected to be a governing majority of 65 seats out of the 120. You've got 32 for Likud, 14 for Religious Zionism, 11 for Shas, and 8 for United Torah Judaism. And those last two are the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox parties. You add all those up, that's 65, leaving 55 in the opposition, giving Netanyahu the expected governing majority. But our listeners and everybody needs to understand this isn't far from over. Because once the final votes are counted later today, as we're recording, because we're at 93% of votes counted, once the final votes are counted, the results are then given to the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, who will use one of his two major powers. Because the president of Israel is really a ceremonial position. And for the American audience, they need to know that there is a president and a prime minister, head of state versus head of government. In America, the United States president holds both of those roles. But in Israel, the president is a ceremonial position, head of state. His two major powers are to grant pardons and to choose the candidate most likely to be able to form a government. So after the votes are finalized, the elections committee will give the results to the president, Isaac Herzog. He has a week, if he wants it, till he can choose someone to take the first shot at forming a government. It is almost certain, of course, he's going to go to Benjamin Netanyahu, and he will then have 28 days to form a coalition. He has actually a 14-day extension if needed, so he could have 42 days to form.
Has used in the past.
He has in the past, but he doesn't want to now. So everybody needs to understand that the election was on Tuesday. The votes will be finalized on Thursday, but this is a long way from over because the coalition negotiations have to start because the president will call in the leader of every party who passed the 3.25% threshold and ask them for their recommendation. Who do you think should be the next prime minister? The majority of those will say Benjamin Netanyahu. Then the president will decide. He doesn't have to follow their recommendations, but he will decide who he will give the first shot to. If he gives it to Netanyahu, that starts the clock for the potential 28 or up to 42 days. But Netanyahu has already started, and Likud has already started the negotiations with the leaders of the other parties to do this as quickly as possible, because Netanyahu's been out of the prime minister's office for 17 months. He doesn't want to wait any longer. He wants to get this done in a week or two, not 6 weeks. So they've already started the negotiations, and it on paper looks more simple because there's only going to be 4 parties in the majority coalition. There were 8 under the Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid coalition from left to right. So that was very complicated to get them all to agree to coalition guidelines. With 4 parties that are all more ideologically aligned, it should be easier. But I remind our audience, these people are not bringing, the leaders of the 3 smaller parties that will join Likud are not coming for free. They are coming. We want this policy. We want this budget allocation. We want this legislative priority. And most importantly, these are the positions we want in government. Who's going to be defense minister? Who's going to be foreign minister? Who's going to be finance minister, etc. So that's the process that will soon begin, is what you call coalition negotiations. And it is very complex.
I think your use of the term horse trading was spot on. It's kind of like voters vote according to ideologies, but when it comes down to this this part of the election where the coalitions are formed, if you look at the agreements, they're talking brass tacks, like specifics. I want this amount of money for this. I want this amount of money for that. I want you to vote like this for this. It really is detailed what they want.
A great example of that is Yisrael Beitenu, led by Avigdor Lieberman, who's not going to be in this governing coalition. One of his major priorities is including the ultra-Orthodox in the IDF draft, whereas Shas and United Torah Judaism, who will be in this coalition, one of their major priorities is exempting the ultra-Orthodox from the draft, and neither one of them will join a coalition if you don't agree to advance that priority.
And that's very strange. Lieberman used to be very close with Netanyahu. And once he broke out of the government, what was it, like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, he just won't sit with Netanyahu. It's interesting, and it pains me to say this, but the ultra-Orthodox parties are, shall we say, pragmatic. They have a few demands. They're clear demands. And if they get them, they can be bought.
And the 2 major demands are, the one we just said: we do not want mandatory military service or national service for yeshiva students. And number 2, we want a hefty state budget funding for yeshivas, for Bible colleges, religious education.
And unfortunately, I actually identify more with the settlers than I do with the religious. So because the religious do not support the settlements as much as they should.
Right.
I think that might be changing as the generations advance, but they're not ideologues. They're practical.
And they understand how government works. And they understand how the finance budget is created. And as I said a moment ago, they are happy to join a Likud-led coalition, but we're coming with our demands. Yeah. It's also interesting who didn't make the cut. It's shocking. Meretz, which is very left wing, only got 5. Labor got 6.
They were
no, sir. No, sir. Those are not the most updated numbers.
Oops.
Meretz does not appear that are going to even enter the Knesset. They are below the threshold.
Which one is below the threshold?
Meretz.
And
Labor.
Meretz was not a major party. Labor practically ran
Labor appears that it's only going to have 4 seats. Now, that was the party that for the first 30 years of the state was the ruling party. And I need to remind the audience of the election vote threshold. Remember, you have to get 3.25% of the national vote to enter the Knesset. That was raised a few years ago, which means the minimum number of seats you can have is 4. If you get 1, 2, or 3 seats, you get 0 seats. So, as of 93% of the votes counted, Meretz sits at 3.15% when they needed to get to 3.25. So Meretz will be at 0 seats, it appears. Balad, the very left-wing anti-Zionist Arab party, also looks like they're going to be at 0 seats, not making the Knesset, which means 260,000 votes that went to those 2 parties are ignored, erased in this process.
Right. But like you said, labor practically, it did run the entire Israeli government for 30 or 40 years until Menachem Begin came along. It was a major upheaval when Begin was elected. I was told by my Sephardi friends who were working class, they were like, yeah, we finally have a voice. So to see them in such a position is stunning. It's totally stunning. The fact that Meretz went away, they were a bit extreme. They're the extreme left wing, the anti-religious. So it's good to see them go. Balad, it's just, in the name of democracy, Israel has these people in the government that hate the country. And it's very painful. So it's not so hard to see them go. I think what it is, the fact that labor dropped so much and Meretz is gone, I think that was actually a referendum on the land for peace policy.
Well, we talked in the last interview that you could argue that 70 or 80% of the country is politically right, which, as we said, is a security thing in Israel, right and left, more so in America. It's morality issues. But of course, with the increase in terrorism, Palestinian terrorism toward Israelis, there is a desire for the right side of politics to improve security. And that's why the left-wing parties did so poorly in this election, because they don't have a plan to try to provide better security and safety for the citizen.
I think a lot of people actually blame them because it was the left-wing agenda that brought about the Oslo process,
right,
and all the other horrible things that we're still paying for. And it's so undercovered or misrepresented in the media. We are in the middle of a war right now. I don't think people understand that. The IDF is going out every single night and encountering large numbers of automatic weapons, of rifles. I just keep wondering, where do they get all those M16s from? And we're in a war right now, and it's inside our country. We're starting, unfortunately, there have been a lot of actual terror attacks inside Israel. A few hours ago, there was a stabbing on the Temple Mount. Or it was either just outside the Temple Mount or on the Temple Mount. I have videos that indicate that it was on the Temple Mount. But we're in the middle of a war, and when you're in the middle of the war, you change your mind very quickly when stuff like that happens. So the security, I think, became a bigger issue, and the left wing, they're gone because of that.
I think we need to bring up a very important comment for the American audience. If the results turn out as we expect, and the religious Zionism party with Smotrich and Ben Gvir are in the ruling coalition with Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu, there are rumors in America that the Biden administration officials will refuse to work with Ben-Gvir, which would be unprecedented, that the American government official would boycott their Israeli counterpart because the Biden administration is left, Ben-Gvir is right, and they have decided we don't like him, we don't like his politics, so we're going to ignore him and refuse to work with him. That is the potential plan or the motivation that's currently in place right now.
I hear they're slow walking everything, and we had two Democrat lawmakers warn Netanyahu that if he brought Ben-Gvir into the coalition, then it would harm the relations between America and Israel. And that's meddling in foreign elections, which shouldn't be done. And there's actually, I've written several articles. There is no end of meddling in Israeli elections, right, all from the Democrats. It's kind of crazy. I wish I could say, oh no, but it's all from the Democrats. There are a lot of examples we're not going to go into. But as we're speaking, there was recently an article in the Washington Free Beacon that the U.S. State Department is working through back channels to set up an embassy to the Palestinians in Jerusalem. What is effectively, they're calling it different things, they're using political backdoors, but having a relationship with Israel is not a priority. I hear that it's focused on Ben-Gvir. I think Ben-Gvir is an excuse. I think that Biden, he was sitting in the White House when Netanyahu spoke in the Congress, and when the relations between Netanyahu and Obama, it was actual malice. And I think it even went beyond politics, because they're the antithesis of each other. And I'm just wondering, maybe we're in for a dark period of political relations between Israel and America, but I don't think I think any way the elections turned out, if it wasn't, the only way that it could have happened differently is if Lapid got in and he would be like, oh yeah, 2-state solution, no problem. You want Jerusalem, take it. But other than that, a strong security in Israel, Biden wouldn't have anything to do with that. And I think I think the Ben-Gvir thing is just an excuse, I think.
Yeah, I say this as an American who spends a lot of time in Israel. It's the most important ally for each state, both ways, I believe. And as an American, I need to remind our American officials, it is against all international norms to try to go create an embassy for another state in the capital of an existing state. You just don't do that. You're not even allowed to do that. So this is against all international policies and norms. It's a policy decision, if America goes forward with it, that is totally ideological and unprofessional, improper, disrespectful, shouldn't be done.
And it hurts America. You were saying that we're an important ally. The Abraham Accords actually made Israel a much more important ally. It wasn't that America was giving Israel a gift, but we became a more important ally. And we saw that played out right in front of our faces when Biden went to Saudi Arabia and asked for more oil, and they said no. Well, if Israel had been on America's side, if we hadn't had the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia might have been more warm to a Republican president. But after Biden showed that he has interests that are not for Israel, not for Saudi Arabia, that they are pro-Iran, they have no other allies in this part of the world. America used to be a close ally with Saudi Arabia. The best ally America has in this part of the world right now is not Saudi Arabia, it's not the UAE, and it's certainly not Iran. That would be a huge mistake. America needs Israel now more than ever.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we opened up that box. So what does this mean? I'm wondering what Christians are thinking in America about the results of these elections.
Well, it's like saying, what do all Jews think about something? It's a non-monolithic block. Okay.
I hope you guys don't argue as much as we do.
Well, there's a lot more Christians, so there's a lot more argument, right?
Okay.
Numbers.
Okay.
So let's talk about the audience that you have with Israel 365, the people I hang out with, the pro-Israel, the Bible-believing, the covenant-believing, that strain of Christianity. Those allegiances, those beliefs about Israel are not political. They are biblical. They are spiritual.
Wow.
So, of course, American Christians and worldwide Christians who are Bible believing and covenant believing, they want Israel to have a stable government and a strong government and safety and prosperity on the world stage and all of that. So if you ask them politically, they're going to give that kind of an answer. But their allegiance and devotion to Israel is not based upon who sits in the Knesset, who's the ruling coalition. This is biblical. This is covenant. This is Genesis 12:3. This is the fact that followers of Jesus understand that Jesus was a Jew who lived in Israel and studied Torah and spoke Hebrew and lived a Torah observant life, an Orthodox Jewish life. Now, we believe Jesus to be Messiah and Son of God, but his earthly life was as a Jew in the land of Israel. And so our devotion to Israel, our support of Israel, is not political and doesn't change when the prime minister changes.
You know, it's funny. I look at, I grew up in America and we learned history and we learned that unfortunately there were long periods of very difficult relations between Christianity and Judaism, Christians and Jews. And so it's almost shocking for me to be in Israel and to have so many really lovely Christians who are connecting with me, and I feel unworthy on one hand. I'm very humbled, but I can't help but note the stark contrast. Why is it that these very same people, driven by a devotion, at one point their devotion drove them to horrible things, and now their devotion is driving them to what I see as lovely things, connecting to Jews, connecting to Israel, connecting even to the Bible as Christians, connecting to the Jewish Bible. It's amazing. And I kind of think that it's because in the exile, they were disappointed in us. We were not doing what they needed for us to do, which was they needed a light unto the nations. They needed a nation that would serve as the priestly nation and in between, an intermediary between them and the God of Israel. And so we needed to serve as that. And as long as we stayed in the exile, we kind of were not living up to their expectations. But I realized that, and it's an amazing realization, but I never realized that it would be foreign policy, that when we do start doing this, the Christians are not going to ask, how do you feel about, oil and gas? How do you feel about the price of the dollar? What they care about is, are you being the Jewish state? And that, I think that's a problem, because Jews are not quite as enthusiastic about that as I think we should be. And that doesn't mean some form of xenophobic government, that we're only Jewish here. I think more so the opposite, that we need to be a light unto the nations. And I think that's actually essentially in this differences in our government. Netanyahu, though he's not religious, I think he does recognize that we're a Jewish state. Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the reasons I think they hate him so much is he's very strongly about that Israel is the Jewish state. So when they say he's a racist, I kind of feel like they're hiding the fact that he's probably the most appealing candidate to the Christians.
Well, people who are secular, non-believers, non-God lovers, non-Bible lovers, no matter what ethnicity they happen to be, oppose the things of God and the things of the Bible. And so their politics is driven by their spiritual angle on things. And so
people, it's all about me. It's all about my whatever, my pleasures.
Well, it's anti-God. It's anti-Bible.
Anti-God.
And so against Bible-believing, faithful Christianity, Bible-believing, faithful Judaism, if you're secular, if you are anti-God, if you are anti-Bible, you are in opposition to those groups, and you develop your political policies, your political agenda to follow your ideology.
Wow. Okay. I think that was a hugely important point. Yeah. God willing. So I think we've said quite a bit, and as you pointed out, this isn't nearly over.
No.
We're in for probably another month of fun and games, and that is if we don't end up going back to elections in another couple months, when I'll get another day off and maybe even do a barbecue this time. I want to tell you, I went into Jerusalem for the elections to cover the elections, and not only do we get the day off, but public transportation is free because they want to enable everyone to go to vote. If you're registered as living in a certain town, you get free transportation to that town. So when I got on the train 2 days ago, it was packed because what did Israelis do? They went to vote and then they took the family out for a deal. So and the city was packed. It was a real vacation day for us. It was quite a trip. So it's not so horrible going to the election six times, but I'd rather not do it anyway. Okay, Pastor Trey, I can't thank you enough. It's such a blessing knowing you. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
I always enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much, and be blessed.